Hi, I'm Emma. The company was my idea, my blood, my blueprint, my sleepless nights. But one morning, I got a group text. Expect a call from our lawyer. No explanation. No goodbye. They didn't even have the decency to lie. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I sold my 51% in silence. By nightfall, 69 missed calls, but none of them said sorry. Tuesday night, 15 a.m. Fog curled along the edges of the glass like smoke from a long doused fire. I sat motionless in my office, 42 floors, up in Seattle's financial district, mug of coffee untouched, its steam long gone cold. My phone buzzed once. I didn't expect a message, not from her. Expect a call from our lawyer. No, hi honey, no, we need to talk. Just a clinical warning from my mother, Patricia Mitchell. I stared at the screen, trying to will the words into meaning something else. But no amount of blinking changed the sender's name. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't even a competitor. This was my mother. And if that wasn't bad enough, I noticed the CC, Madison. Of course, Madison always knew first. She was always looped in even before I finished a sentence. My younger sister with the sharper tongue and shinier smile. My COO appointed without my input, approved behind my back. But this was different. This wasn't a birthday without an invite. This wasn't her name being listed before mine in press releases. This was legal. They weren't just cutting me out of dinners or headlines anymore. They were cutting me out of what I built. I turned toward the window, the skyline now swallowed by Pacific Northwest haze. Seattle in late fall always felt like it was trying to disappear. I ran my fingers over the engraved plate on my desk. Emma Mitchell, CEO and founder. It used to mean something. Used to come with respect and long nights and instant noodles at 2 a.m. while drafting product specs on napkins. I'd launched this company on nothing but willpower and a $50K loan from a credit union. My mom had joined after Dad passed, said she wanted to help with structure. I let her in thinking she meant it as support. She meant control. Madison came next, fresh from Wharton with more ego than experience. Let her shadow you, Mom had said. I did. I let her attend meetings, take calls. Next thing I knew, Madison was scheduling those meetings without me giving interviews I didn't authorize, signing off on decisions with titles she hadn't earned. It had all felt so gradual. Until now. Until a lawyer got involved. I unlocked my drawer and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. The corners were worn from how often I'd considered opening it. But I hadn't. Not until I was sure. Not until they told me in plain text that I wasn't one of them anymore. 2 months ago, I'd met with a private equity firm. Quietly, carefully. Marcus Chen, the billionaire who'd built his fortune disrupting legacy industries, had reached out personally. I drafted a deal to sell my 51% stake. I didn't need the money. I needed the separation, but I hadn't pulled the trigger. I was still holding out hope naively that they might treat me like family. This was confirmation. I peeled open the envelope. Inside was the agreement. Signed, notarized, valuation generous, terms clean. Just one signature missing. Mine. I set it on the desk, and then I thought back to senior year graduation. Valedictorian. I'd spent 2 weeks writing that speech, practiced every night in front of the bathroom mirror. The morning of the ceremony, Mom handed me a new version, completely rewritten. This is tighter, she said. More relatable. The new version barely mentioned me. It opened with a story about Madison helping me study. It ended with her standing beside me at the podium. That was the pattern. I carried the weight. Madison got the spotlight, and Mom made sure of it every single time. I looked back down at my phone. The text still sat there unread, but already burned into memory. I opened a new message. Understood. No more, no less. Not because I wasn't angry, but because I was done giving them any more of me. No explanations. No justifications. No more pleading to be seen. I hit send. Then slowly I signed the agreement. My name steady and firm. I slid the document back into the envelope and sealed it shut. My fingers lingered on the flap for a second. Then I rose, grabbed my coat, and headed to the elevator. Not a single person in the office looked up as I passed. Not that I expected them to. I paused by the door, turned, once looked at the plaque one last time. Emma Mitchell, CEO and founder. Let them strip the title. Let them install someone else. They could have the desk, the meetings, the press. They'd never get my soul again. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and watched the floor numbers tick down like a countdown to freedom. I didn't look back as I stepped into the elevator. Not at the office, not at the life I'd built over 2 decades. Instead, I kept my eyes on the floor numbers blinking steadily downward. 34, 33, 32, each one like a notch carved into my spine. By the time I reached the ground, I wasn't shaking, just cold. I didn't cry in the car either. The silence between Seattle and Bellevue was long and gray like the sky above I-90. I drove with the windows up, no music, no calls, just the soft hum of the engine and the quiet ache behind my ribs, the ache of clarity. By 2:00 p.m., I was stepping into a modest brick building tucked just off Main Street in Bellevue. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked a far cry from the gleaming towers my mother loved to flaunt. But that's why I chose it. A receptionist greeted me by name. No ID check, no fanfare, just, "She's expecting you, Ms. Mitchell." Then a quiet hallway and a glass door with etched lettering, Chen Strategic Acquisitions. Marcus Chen stood when I entered, tall, composed silver threading through his otherwise black hair. His handshake was firm but warm. He'd built a fortune by seeing value where others saw wreckage, and today I was bringing him both. "You look calm," he said gently. I offered a smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's the part I rehearsed. We sat in a private corner office. No windows, no distractions, just clean surfaces and locked filing cabinets. Safe, controlled. Chen's lead counsel slid a folder across the table. "We finalized the terms this morning. All assets are secure. The transition team is in place. Strict NDA on our end. No leaks." I opened my bag and took out the envelope I'd sealed that morning, placed it on top of hers. 51%, I said. Founding stake, voting control, transfer to execute upon sign-off. Chen studied my face. "You understand this will hit them like a freight train." I nodded. "They'll say you blindsided them." "They've been blindsiding me for years," I said, voice level. "I just finally stepped out of the way." He gave the smallest nod of respect. "For what it's worth, we're not interested in your company for its tech or its revenue. We're interested in the impact. The structure your family built is rotten at the core. We specialize in reconstruction." That word reconstruction sat heavy in the air. A month ago, Patricia told me, "You're too passive to lead." She said it over dinner, slicing her salmon like she was carving me out of her life one bite at a time. And when I pushed back, she smiled like I was overreacting. "Don't be so sensitive, Emma. That's why people don't take you seriously." And Madison. She didn't say much, just kept texting through the meal, never once looking up as Mom said my ideas were soft and visionary in a dreamy sort of way. They'd always made it clear my voice only mattered when they needed funding or crisis cleanup. Not for celebration, not for legacy. So I stopped arguing. I chose silence, and I built this deal brick by brick in that silence. Quiet meetings, encrypted emails, burner phones, a fortress they couldn't touch. Chen's counsel flipped through the final pages. "Sign here." I didn't hesitate. It wasn't a signature of revenge. It was a signature of release. When the last pen stroke dried, she looked up. "Your mother and sister are going to lose their minds." "I expect they will." Chen leaned back. "And you—" I pulled out the small wooden box from my tote, the one Dad gave me on my 30th birthday. I opened it just enough to reveal the brass nameplate tucked inside. Arthur Mitchell, founder. I keep this, I said quietly, because integrity should never have been a memory. He watched me for a long beat. You know, most people who come to us are either angry or broken. I closed the box. I was both. I'm neither now. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face like a reset button. I walked to the corner past the cafe where Dad used to take me after doctor appointments. The same cafe that now had a chalkboard sign that read, "Pumpkin Spice Back in Season." I didn't stop. My phone buzzed around 11:42 p.m., just as I was brushing my teeth. I glanced at the screen. "Patricia, call me, please." I stared at it. Then it buzzed again. "Madison, what did you do?" Then again, and again. By the time I crawled into bed, I'd counted 68 messages. I didn't open a single one. I shut the front door behind me and clicked the deadbolt into place. The hallway light buzzed softly as I slid off my heels, the weight of the day finally pressing down but not breaking me. I dropped my bag on the side table, exhaled through my nose, and padded into the kitchen for water. By the time I reached for a glass, my phone abandoned near the couch lit up across the room. "Call me, please." Then another, and then 67 more. I didn't check them all. I didn't need to. Just the preview flashes said enough. Flustered names, late night desperation, the unraveling of something they never imagined they'd lose. I stayed standing in the kitchen, the cool granite of the counter steady beneath my palms. My apartment in Queen Anne had always felt like a place apart. Its quiet brick exterior, its original hardwood floors, its stubborn windows. I'd bought it with my own money, renovated it myself, and tonight, it felt like refuge. The screen lit again. Madison, followed by an unknown number, then Patricia. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear their voices to know how they sounded. Patricia's would be clipped measured, but brittle. Madison's would crack somewhere between insult and plea, that tone she used when she was caught lying, but still thought she could flip the narrative. The texts kept piling in. "You didn't really do it right. This isn't legal. Please answer. I swear to God if you don't, after all we did for you." I sat down on the edge of the couch. My legs were trembling now, not from fear, but from the long-held tension finally releasing. I let my phone buzz against the cushion and looked instead at the small ceramic bowl on the coffee table filled with spare keys, a cracked silver ring, and a lone button from Dad's old navy peacoat. That coat used to hang on the back of his office door. The day after his funeral, it was gone. They never asked if I wanted it. A vibration against my thigh pulled me out of the memory. New text, "You'll destroy the family legacy." I stared at those words. That word, legacy, as if it were something sacred, as if it hadn't already been stained long before I chose to step away. And what legacy exactly? The one where decisions were made behind closed doors, where I was paraded at fundraisers as the responsible daughter, but never once invited to speak on record, where my ideas were smart. Only until Patricia disagreed, I stood up and walked to my desk. There in the bottom drawer was my old leather journal. I hadn't opened it in years, not since the last board meeting, where I'd left feeling invisible despite having chaired every committee on the agenda. I flipped to the back and began writing, "Dear Mom. I wanted to believe you'd fight for me one day, not against me. I waited a long time to feel like I belonged. I kept thinking if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, proved more, you'd see me. But maybe you never looked." I paused, pen hovering above the paper. Then I tore the page out, crumpled it in one motion, and walked it to the kitchen. I lit a match from the drawer and dropped the paper into the sink. It caught fast, burned quiet. No smoke alarm even stirred. I watched until it turned to ash. It was close to 2:00 a.m. when the text finally slowed. My phone battery had dropped to 9%. I turned it face down again and crawled under the throw blanket on the couch. I didn't want the bed tonight. The couch somehow felt safer, closer to ground level, closer to myself. And then it came. Not from Patricia, not from Madison. A short message blinking at the top of the screen from a name I had saved under Chen Legal. FYI, the firm has frozen outgoing cash transfers from the company. They tried to move $2.4 million, thought you'd want to know. I sat up slowly. Of course they tried. Patricia had always kept an emergency slush fund, and Madison had joked half drunk at some Christmas party years ago that she'd find a way to funnel it all to the Caymans if things ever went south. I guess tonight was her version of south. I took a sip of the now warm water beside me and leaned back into the cushion. I didn't smile. I didn't even exhale with triumph. I just whispered, "Let the audits begin." The screen stayed lit longer than I expected, casting a cold glow over the dark wood floors. I sat still at the kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a half-empty mug of tea that had long gone cold. The message blinked once more. FYI, the firm has frozen outgoing cash transfers from the company. They tried to move $2.4 million. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Just closed the screen gently and placed the phone down beside the mug. It didn't surprise me. Not really. I just hadn't expected them to move that fast. By the time the sun broke through the sheer curtains in my living room, casting a golden stripe across the back of my hand, I was already dressed and halfway through my second cup. I'd showered, changed into my charcoal suit, the one Madison once mocked for being too serious for a founder, and now sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop open, waiting for Chen's team to call. At 8:02 a.m., the video chat loaded. My reflection in the small square window looked steady, steadier than I felt. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," said Eleanor Hayes, head of acquisitions. "We detected a flag transaction around midnight. Attempted transfer to a shell account registered in Delaware." She didn't need to say whose name was on it. I nodded once. "Let me guess. Madison." "Correct. The LLC is called Pacific Ventures Group. Registered 6 months ago. No public operations. We traced it to her and a former board secretary." Of course. Madison never had patience for subtlety. It had always been her way: make a mess, first spin the PR after. "We've paused all financial activity as of this morning," Eleanor continued. "Our legal team recommends a full audit. Internal memos show what appears to be consistent siphoning of funds labeled as consulting retainers. Roughly $2.4 million this year alone." I leaned back, arms crossed. The number wasn't as shocking as the timing. They knew I was stepping out. They knew the ink wasn't dry yet. And still they scrambled to pull what they could, like rats leaving a burning ship. Eleanor cleared her throat. "We'd like to ask if you'd be willing to stay on. Not as an employee, of course, but as a transition witness. Help us ensure nothing disappears." I thought about it for less than a second. "I'll do it. Under one condition. No one gets fired yet. I want everything documented. Every invoice, every email, every whisper behind closed doors. If I've learned anything, it's that people rewrite history when they're cornered." Eleanor gave a single sharp nod. "Understood. We'll proceed discreetly." By 10:15, the digital forensics team had already begun combing through archived drives. I wasn't on site, but my inbox was flooded with scanned documents, flagged transactions, and internal messages. One stood out. A memo from Patricia to Madison, dated 7 months ago. Subject line: "Keep this under the radar. Emma doesn't need the stress." My jaw tightened, but I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Chen's legal team and closed the email tab. I stood and walked into the study, hands trailing along the old oak shelf. On the top row, right between my father's dog-eared business books, was the wooden box, the same one I'd found after his funeral. I sat down at the desk, opened the latch, and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a few yellowing photos and the last notepad he ever used, was a small black thumb drive, taped to it in his handwriting, "In case they forget who built this." I plugged it into the laptop. The drive opened immediately. No encryption, just one folder labeled Founder's Ledger. Inside spreadsheets, financial records, receipts, dates going back 18 years, and a scanned letter. His resignation draft dated 2 weeks before his stroke. In it, he wrote, "Emma is the only reason this ship is still afloat. When I'm gone, protect her, or this company will eat itself alive." I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when the screen blurred slightly from the morning light hitting my eyes. I just saved everything to a new folder and backed it up 3 times. Later that afternoon, I received a formal notification from Eleanor. It was official. Subject Emergency Governance Review. All board members. Attendance mandatory. Time 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Location Seattle HQ. 42nd floor conference room. I stared at the line that said attendance mandatory and let out a small dry laugh. They'd spent years pretending I wasn't part of the real company, that I was the soft one, the glue that didn't matter. Now they were about to find out how much glue actually held. The conference room door clicked shut behind me like a gavel hitting wood. I didn't need to check the time. I'd been staring at the invite all morning, knowing this would be the moment everything cracked open. Not just for them, but for me. They were already seated. Patricia and Madison sat side by side, their lawyer, a few chairs away, thumbing through a folder thick enough to hold a year's worth of excuses. Patricia's nails tapped rhythmically on the polished walnut table. Her tell when she was nervous. I hadn't seen her nervous since the Christmas she thought I'd found out about the misplaced company bonuses. Several of the board members barely looked up when I walked in. A few nodded curtly. One looked straight down at his phone. I used to share coffee with these people, built late-night pitch decks with them. Now I was a ghost in a room I'd helped build. Invited not as a partner, but as a witness. Chen's legal team stood calmly at the head of the table. They didn't waste time. "Let's begin," the lead counsel said, clicking the remote. The first slide hit like a hammer. Dates, vendor names, wire transfers. A voice from the legal team spoke over the slideshow, calm, controlled. For the past 14 months, company funds have been rerouted through unauthorized consulting agreements, each one signed by either Patricia or Madison. These contracts linked to 3 separate LLCs, all tracing back to personal accounts both domestic and offshore. My stomach turned at the sight of my father's name used in a shell company header, Mitchell Consulting Group. He would have been sick. Slide after slide unfolded. Hotel invoices marked as international compliance retreats, when in reality Patricia had taken a week in Tuscany. Madison had spent thousands on recruitment dinners, at luxury spas, and then came the $2.4 million attempted transfer. Their last grab before Chen froze everything. No one said a word. No gasps, just the buzz of the ceiling lights and the clicking of slides. The lead counsel set down the remote. "There will be time for statements at the end." Then they turned to me. "Ms. Mitchell, would you like to make a statement?" I stood slowly. My voice didn't shake. I stayed quiet for years because I didn't want to believe my own family would steal from something we built together. But I was wrong. I sat down. No dramatics, no tears, just the truth laid out like blueprints for a house already burning. Chen's team stepped forward again. "Our legal recommendation is as follows: suspend all salary and bonus payments to Ms. Patricia and Ms. Madison effective immediately pending further investigation. Remove Patricia from all decision-making authority and install an interim CFO to ensure financial compliance." They paused, then added, "Board members may now vote." There was silence save for the shuffle of papers and the soft clatter of the buyer's pen. The motion passed unanimously. Patricia slammed her hand against the table. Her voice cracked not with fear but fury. "This is our legacy. You're tearing it apart." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "You already did." She turned toward me, face blotched with rage, but Madison reached out to hold her wrist, not out of affection, just to stop her from making it worse. Then Chen lifted a final sheet from the packet. "There's one more item," he said, passing a printed email around the table. It was from Patricia. Subject line, "Next phase." Attached was a PDF document with wiring instructions to an offshore account in Bermuda. Chen's tone never wavered. This transfer was dated the morning after Miss Patricia texted Ms. Mitchell asking for the lawyer's contact info. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every face in that room turned toward her, and for the first time she had nothing to say. The room was silent for a moment longer than expected. No one reached for their coffee. No one looked at Patricia. Chen had just dropped the line like a stone in a still lake. "That transfer, it was dated the morning after she texted you about the lawyer." That was it. The final nail. I pushed back my chair and stood thanking the board quietly before stepping out of the room. Outside, the air was thick with late afternoon humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and made your clothes feel too tight. I didn't go straight to the parking lot. Instead, I walked toward Elliott Bay, needing distance from those walls from the sterile air of Betrayal. My phone buzzed again. Another email from Chen's legal team. Subject line, "Confidential internal correspondence." Patricia. I opened it expecting another set of receipts, maybe a bank ledger or wire confirmation. It wasn't that. It was an email from Patricia to someone named Bernard Cromwell, apparently a financial advisor based in the Cayman Islands. The message was brief, sterile in tone, but the subject line punched me in the chest. Transition, strategy, discreet execution. Below that, attachments marked draft, structure, liquidation paths. She'd sent it exactly 22 minutes after texting me that vague message about needing to talk and family coming first. That night, I had cried thinking she was finally trying to reach out. Turns out she just needed to buy time. I sat down on a bench overlooking the water. My hands shook, but I didn't cry. Not this time. A memory came to me clearer than it had any right to be after all these years. My father setting down his glass after dinner one night, leaning in close and saying, "Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Never let it silence you." I must have been 16, too young to understand what he meant. But now it felt like the one sentence I needed. The sun dipped lower, and the sky shifted from gold to deep blue. I finally stood and made my way home. Back in my apartment, I poured a glass of water and went to the shelf where I kept the old journal. The binding was worn, the edges curled, but it was still intact, still mine. I opened it to a page from years ago, a page written late at night after one of our first product launches. I had written, "We'll rise together or not at all." I stared at the sentence, then reached for a pen. Underneath it, I added, "Survival is no longer a group effort." And this time I underlined it. There was no need to burn bridges. The bridges were gone. But what stood in the ashes might still carry me somewhere new. That night, I ordered Thai takeout, barely tasted it. The silence in my apartment no longer felt hollow. It felt earned. The next morning, my phone rang just as I was getting ready. I recognized the number instantly. "Mr. Chen?" I asked, uncertain. "Emma," he said warmly. "I read the journal piece. Quite the storm you walked through." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "It's been a week. I always told folks you were the brain behind the brand. Everyone else just brought noise. You kept the engine running." "Not everyone believed that." "Well, I do. And I happen to have some space, literal space, downtown, a startup incubator I fund. It's clean quiet and entirely yours if you want it. No strings, just your name on the door and a fresh slate." It took me a second to speak. I don't know what to say. "Say yes, and when you're ready, build something better." We ended the call with a promise to meet next week. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt something. A shift. That afternoon, I took a short drive to a place I hadn't visited in years, the old factory floor where our first batch of products was made. It was shuttered now, but the bones were still there. I parked outside, stepped over a patch of tall grass, and let myself in through the side gate. I still remembered the code. The air smelled like dust and steel. The machines were long gone, but the outlines were still marked on the floor. I walked, slowly touching the walls, remembering the workers by name. Alma, Frank, Denise. Faces I hadn't thought of in years. At the center of the space, I stopped. We started here. I whispered to no one. I can start again. Just then, my phone rang again. It was my attorney. I answered her voice coming through clear and direct. Emma, they filed a motion in federal court. Patricia's team is trying to freeze your personal assets. I didn't flinch. It's retaliation, she continued. But we're ready. The phone call ended with a promise, but the kind that left a dull pressure in my chest instead of comfort. I remained seated in the quiet of my attorney's office, the morning sun slanting through the window, hitting the edge of the conference table like a blade. Just minutes earlier, she'd said it as calmly as someone reading the weather. They filed a motion to freeze your personal assets. It's retaliation. But we're ready. I didn't speak, not right away. I let it land. Then I stood. Let's walk through the filing. She slid the papers across the table without hesitation. Patricia and Madison are alleging malicious intent. They claim you timed the sale to inflict reputational harm. They say you wanted the company to implode. I raised an eyebrow, scanning the document. Their language was brutal. Words like sabotage, destabilize, and intentional harm painted me as some sort of villain plotting behind velvet curtains. They're painting this as emotional warfare, she added, claiming your exit wasn't just strategic, it was meant to hurt. They didn't mind hurting me when they stripped my voting rights, I murmured, or when they kicked me off the founding documents. She nodded. We've prepared a full response. Timelines, emails, financial statements. We've laid it all out. Your actions were measured, documented. They predate their accusations by months. As I flipped to the appendix, I paused on a screenshot. It was Patricia's text to Madison. She's out. I want her nowhere near this. My mouth curled slightly, not into a smile, something harder. By 11:00 a.m., we were already filing our counter-response. We sat across from their legal team in the deposition room by early afternoon. Everything in there felt sterile. Stainless steel fixtures, generic watercolor prints, legal pads lined up like soldiers, and in the middle, Patricia, polished but rigid, her eyes rimmed with tired concealer. Her lawyer prompted gently. Please answer the question, Ms. Mitchell. Patricia's voice wavered as she repeated the line. She wasn't supposed to be part of it anymore. I didn't flinch. Did you ever formally notify her about the board votes? My lawyer followed up. A pause. No, she said. There wasn't a reason to. She wouldn't have supported the direction we were going. So you intentionally excluded her. I protected the company from interference. She snapped and then caught herself. Too late. The court recorder's fingers didn't stop moving. Later that evening in the hallway outside the conference room, I passed Madison. She avoided my gaze, but I caught it just for a second. A flicker of something behind her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. I kept walking. That night, after everything was filed, I curled up on the couch with a cup of peppermint tea. I needed something grounding. I picked up the framed photo from the side table, one from our early days at the company. The three of us, arms slung over each other's shoulders, still in jeans and borrowed blazers. I remembered what Madison whispered to Patricia one Thanksgiving years ago, right after dessert when I was in the kitchen. You know she'll outgrow all of us. At the time, I thought it was meant kindly. Now I heard it differently. They weren't just afraid of me leaving. They were terrified of me succeeding. The doorbell rang just before 9:00 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a man in a dark suit handed me an envelope. For Ms. Emma Mitchell, he said not unkindly before tipping his head and leaving without another word. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Typed neatly on thick paper, drop all counterclaims. Agree not to speak to the press. Will settle quietly. I stood in my doorway, letter in hand, while the night wind brushed against my bare arms. Quiet. That was always their endgame. The knock at my door wasn't loud, but it was certain. I opened it to find a man in a slate gray suit holding a slim envelope in gloved hands. For Ms. Emma Mitchell, he said flatly, then turned and walked away without waiting for acknowledgement. Back inside, I stood in the kitchen, the envelope unopened on the counter next to my tea. I already knew what it was, and yet I didn't move right away. My palms rested on the cool marble as I stared down, thinking about how quickly betrayal can shift into bureaucracy. When I finally slid the letter open, my suspicions were confirmed. A formal settlement offer. It was worded politely, diplomatically even, but the tone beneath was unmistakable. Drop all counterclaims. Agree not to speak to the press. We'll settle quietly. That was their version of mercy. Hush money. Not a word about the company, about the manipulation, or about what they'd done to me behind closed doors. Just a generous payout and a non-disclosure agreement that read like a gag order. The next morning, I sat across from my attorney Diana in her office. She didn't waste time. They're not interested in resolving this. They're interested in erasing you. Her tone was even, but her eyes were sharp. They want you gone, but muzzled. Quiet, invisible. That's the point of this NDA. I nodded slowly, tapping the paper with one finger. How generous is generous? Diana raised an eyebrow. Enough to tempt someone who's tired, not enough to buy your name back. We went silent for a moment. I knew exactly what they feared. Not my lawsuit, but my voice. Later that afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the living room, my phone buzzed with a text from a former colleague, Sarah. Have you seen business today? I hadn't. I set the towel down and opened the link she sent. The headline slapped me in the face. Founding partner sells stake amid burnout rumors. A new era begins. I didn't need to read the byline to know where it came from. The article was filled with vague references to internal friction and leadership fatigue, with indirect quotes from anonymous insiders. But one stood out. Madison Mitchell is poised to lead with clarity and innovation, filling the void left behind by a founder ready for rest. Rest? I almost laughed. That's what they were calling exile now. By the time I got to the third paragraph, my hands had stopped shaking. There was no panic left, just clarity. This was war, and they had fired first under a silk napkin. That evening, I met Diana again. We sat in a quiet room at her office, the buzz of evening life dulled by thick walls and fluorescent lights. I'm not signing, I said, plainly holding the letter between us like a flag I refused to raise. They don't get to rewrite the story and then buy the silence of the one person who lived it. Diana nodded. Then we respond, loudly. By Monday morning, we had filed a public countersuit. Breach of fiduciary duty, wrongful removal, and defamation. We didn't stop there. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, my open letter went live. When family betrays you in boardrooms, you don't hide. You rebuild, and you bring receipts. The statement spread faster than we expected. I wasn't some media darling, but I was the invisible builder of something people believed in. That mattered. The hashtags came next. Silent founders. Stolen legacy, and with them questions. From journalists, investors, former employees. My inbox turned into a confessional. By midweek, an anonymous message appeared from a burner address. Check your lawyer's inbox. They buried more than minutes. Diana called me an hour later. You're not going to believe this. Someone just sent internal emails, time-stamped, forwarded between Madison and Patricia coaching board members on how to vote you out 2 weeks before the vote was ever announced. The walls they built were starting to crack. On Thursday, I visited the company's public office downtown. I wasn't there to make a scene. I just needed to see something. As I passed the main hallway, I saw the founder wall. Once there had been 3 portraits. Now there were 2. Mine was gone. I stood in front of the blank space for a long moment, then quietly walked out. Back home that night, I went to my study. On the desk was an old black and white photo of my dad and me, taken on the day we signed our first prototype patent. We were standing outside in the cold, bundled up, both laughing with squinted eyes. I put it in a simple frame and set it where the morning sun would catch it. That's the only legacy I care to keep, I whispered. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. 3 weeks moved both too fast and too slow. Between depositions and strategy sessions, I barely slept. Yet somehow I found peace in the preparation. There was something healing about finally being allowed to bring everything to light without being talked over, written out, or locked out of the boardroom I'd helped build. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed quietly. No power suits, no calculated elegance, just a navy blue dress, my father's cufflinks at the sleeves, tiny silver anchors he'd worn when we broke ground on our first warehouse. The King County Courthouse was already buzzing when we arrived. Press vans lined the street. Security ushered us through side entrances. Inside, every row in the gallery was filled. Employees, old college friends, competitors, and strangers who had followed every headline. Patricia and Madison were already seated when I stepped in. Patricia glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Madison stared straight ahead, jaw clenched like she was biting down on broken glass. I took my seat. My attorney leaned over, whispering, "You sure you want to speak first?" I nodded. I didn't come this far to stay quiet now. The judge signaled us forward. I stood. I didn't come here for revenge. I began steady and slow. I came here for the truth, and for every woman who's ever been told to stay grateful while they're being erased. The room was still. I could feel my hands trembling, but my voice held. Over the next 2 days, we laid it all out. Emails that never made it to me. Strategic decisions signed off without my name on them. Financial records showing asset transfers I never approved. A time-stamped video where Madison barked orders to department heads she had no legal authority over. In that clip, she even laughed, saying, "Don't worry, Emma's too busy with her little art projects to notice." Then came the testimony. A former intern stepped forward, her voice soft but sure. Emma was the only one who knew my name. She stayed late with us during grant season. Patricia only ever showed up when there was a photographer. The judge leaned in. "Do you believe this removal was lawful?" The girl hesitated, then said clearly, "No, sir. It wasn't right." By the afternoon of the 3rd day, the tension in the courtroom had changed. The smugness had cracked. Madison tapped her pen nervously. Patricia kept whispering to their counsel. And then the verdict. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked directly at us. "This court finds that the board acted with gross misconduct and exclusionary malice. The removal of Ms. Mitchell was not only unethical, but orchestrated to eliminate her contributions from the company's legacy." He continued, "The court orders restitution of withheld shares, a correction to all public records and corporate materials, naming Ms. Mitchell as founding partner, and a formal acknowledgement of her role in the inception and growth of the company." He looked at me. "You are fully vindicated." I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let my shoulders finally drop. Outside, the media swarmed. Questions flew from every direction. Will you return to the company? Are you planning another venture? Do you have a statement for Patricia or Madison? I held up a hand and spoke just once. I don't need a title to know my worth. but some truths deserve to be spoken aloud. That's all I ever wanted. That evening, I returned to the old warehouse, our first one, the one that still bore the faded nameplate above the roll-up door. I wasn't alone. Beside me walked Kara, a young founder I'd been mentoring on the side. She had fire in her eyes and a sketchbook full of ideas more daring than anything I'd dreamed in my 30s. We stepped inside. The place smelled of sawdust and ambition, echoes of long nights and first breaks. "I can't believe this is where it all started," she said, looking around. I reached into my bag and pulled out a ring of keys worn and scratched from years of use. "This was always meant to be more than a monument," I told her. "It's a launch pad. Your turn now." I dropped the keys into her hand. Back at home, I stood in front of my bookshelf and pulled down one last photo. Me and my dad, arms around each other, covered in dirt and sweat from that first sight inspection. I placed it beside the framed court ruling. No spotlight, no crowd, just quiet, just peace. I built one empire with people who forgot how we got there. I'll build the next with people who never forget who held the hammer first. Have you ever been erased by the very people you helped rise? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone.